What are some creepy stories from your culture?
Silent scan.
From Paraguay. JC Jatir. He's a blonde, beautiful dwarf that goes around naked in the woods. He owns a golden stick that provides him with magical powers. He kidnaps the kids that don't sleep in the afternoon, around 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. here. And if he returns them, they're often deaf or mute. Lucen is similar to a werewolf. The Tuesdays and Fridays nights, he transforms into a horrible dog. The souls he takes never go to the afterlife, and that's why he's so feared. Some people think the seventh kid in every family grows to be a Lucen, Pumbero, some kind of elf. He is the guardian of the woods and wild animals. He lives in the countryside and announces his presence whistling. If he is your friend, he can guide you through the woods and help you, but if he's your enemy, he can do all sorts of things to you. He punishes the hunters that kill more animals than necessary by making them disappear forever.
Silent scan.
When I was a kid growing up on the family farm in Poland, we had stories of the Czarny Black Mar, in our village. It was said that an unknown young lady would come to a party, and if you danced with her, she would later sneak into your bedroom and ape and kill you. One way to defend against her is to cut off a horse's mane, cover it in horse shit, and hide it under a rock near your house. Apparently, she really likes that kind of thing. There was also a way to discover her at the party. If you were able to see the unknown girl's bareback, and she had whip marks, then it was the Czarny. If discovered, she would flee, and you never see her again. All this was back in the early 80s. And I was very young, so I'm not sure if they just told these stories to scare kids, or if it was a legend people believed. Either way, I was scared.
Silent scan.
Look up trees when you are out walking at night. A virgin ghost that will suck the life out of you sits up there waiting for you to look up. When a person is asleep, their soul leaves their body. If you paint or draw on a sleeping person's face, their soul will not recognize them and be unable to jump back into the body. Assassination must be really easy in Indonesia.
Silent scan.
The Brothers Grimm collected stories of folklore throughout Germany during the 19th century. Amongst them are plenty of famous and often dark fairy tales. One example is the famous story of the Pied Piper of Hamelin. During the 13th century, the city of Hamelin suffered from a great rat plague. The people of Hamelin were out of their wits. One day though, a stranger in colorful clothes appeared and promised them to rid them of the rats for an appropriate payment. The citizens agreed and promised him a generous reward if he succeeded. The stranger was a skillful piper and played a melody on his flute that made the rats and mice of the city to gather around him. Enchanted by his music, they followed him when he stepped into a nearby river where they drowned. The piper had fulfilled his promise, but the people of Hamelin denied him his reward. The stranger left angrily and without payment. Some time later though, he returned and played his flute once more. This time it were the children of Hamelin that fell under his tune's spell. He led them out of the town and into a cave under a mountain. Only 2 of the children returned, one blind, one mute, unable to tell where they had been. None of the other children were ever seen again. There are plenty of variations of this old folk tale, but the gist usually remains the same.
Silent scan.
A small town in upstate New York. There used to be a train station there, back when people actually took passenger trains anywhere in rural areas. Fairly well-off guy, well known in town, comes racing into the station right before midnight. Seconds later, a huge, old-fashioned, jet black train with nobody aboard, I mean nobody, rolls into the station. No schedule shows the train arriving for another hour, but there it is. Guy runs through the booth and jumps onto the train. Train rolls off into the night. Nobody ever saw him again. There's a song about something like this in the show Over the Garden Wall. It's called Old Black Train, and the train is meant to represent death collecting passengers and taking them away. Plus the show takes place in a kind of forest setting in some old-timey small rural towns. It's not upstate New York specifically, but it's the same kind of environment. Reminds me of this.
Silent scan.
In Romania, I grew up on a farm, and my grandma and her sister were super religious, but they also believed in folk tales. This one folk tale said that each year on a specific night in summer, forgot the date, sorry, the day of the Sinzine, these mythical forest nymphs would come out and play their instruments together around town. You were never supposed to go outside if you heard music playing, because it was their way of drawing people out. My grandma's sister told me this story about a person from their village who was working late on that day and didn't want to go home. As he was working, he heard folk music, and the sounds were getting closer and closer, so he hid in a haystack. He then overheard the sound of a string breaking and a female voice saying, "Oh no, my guitar string broke." Then another voice said, "Oh, don't worry, maybe that man over there can help." And they apparently took one of his muscles from his leg and used it as a replacement for the string. And since then that man never walked on that foot ever again. This story used to scare me so much when I was little, and I never knew if they made it up entirely, or if it was a tale passed on through generations, but it was super creepy.
Silent scan.
Not sure if this is universal for my culture, but the nightmare of Lilith. I had sleep paralysis a lot growing up. When you're in your REM sleep cycle, your body is paralyzed to keep you from acting out your dreams. With sleep paralysis, you become aware that you're dreaming, and open your eyes, but you can't move a muscle. However, since you're in your REM cycle, your dreams blend with your bedroom. A lot of people report hallucinating a witch pressing down on their chest, making breathing difficult. It's quite a scary experience. So I told my grandmother this, and she told me about the demon Lilith. In Hebrew folklore, Lilith was the first wife of Adam, also made from dirt, instead of from his rib, like Eve. Since they were made equally, Lilith refused to lie beneath Adam. She refused to bend to the will of a man, so she was banished from the Garden of Eden. She mated with the archangel Samuel, but found herself infertile, and became a wanton, baby-stealing demon in the night. Yeah. So my grandmother told me that my sleep paralysis was a visit from Lilith. A fun belief for an 8-year-old to fuel an already overactive imagination.
Silent scan.
3 that I can think of. Rakurukubi was a woman during the day, but when they would sleep, their neck would stretch to incredible lengths, and roam around freely, drinking either blood, or sometimes eating humans. Big Kujir, or ghost whale. A huge ghost-like whale skeleton, that is followed by a flock of birds or fish. They appear on rainy nights near the coastal whale villages, scaring, and placing a curse on anyone who sees it. The curse would bring famine, plague fire, and all various kinds of disasters to the village that sees it. Joragumo. In Japanese folklore, this is a magical, 400-year-old giant spider that can change its appearance into a beautiful woman. She will seduce young handsome men, wrap them up in her web and eats them. These 3 are also known as yokai.
Silent scan.
This is a Mongolian myth. My grandma told me this when we were at the countryside, where there's very little human interaction. She told me that after it's dark, or you go outside alone while herding, and if you go far enough to not see the chimney of the yurt you're living at, a ghost, or a spirit comes makes you faint, and have a seizure. The way you know the ghost is near, is when an animal of your herd starts to have a seizure, and their mouth bubbles up. If you're fast enough, and see the chimney of your yurt, you may be able to avoid the spirit, but most likely, by the time you realize what's going on, you goners. I don't remember if you die by the end of it, or is just left there. Even so, it was a pretty creepy story when she told me about it, especially when it was after sunset.
Silent scan.
Might not be well known, but here in Australia we have the Min Min light. Basically, if you follow or try to catch this guy, you are never to be seen again. It is said that it predates European settlement, so it isn't some colonists taking half-caste children at night. We also have the Yowie, which is like the Australian Sasquatch, and the Bunyip, an aquatic dog-like creature that drags children and women to their watery graves. There are also various rumors of big cats living in outback. A few planes went down in between World War I and World War II. As a result, these cats were released into different regions of Australia. The most common being the Penrith panther, or Blue Mountains panther. We even named a football team after them. Sightings were that common. I have heard of instances similar to this all up and down the East Coast, so I personally this it is likely true. Back when my grandfather was a kid, during the 1930s in rural far south coast of NSW, there were sightings for about 2 years of a tiger-like animal in farm, bushland.
Silent scan.
Krampus. A legend about a glacier from my region. Some farmers got so rich with their land that they used pure silver as cowbells, bathed in cow milk, and they made their streets from cheese and butter so the devil may have something to eat as well. At some point, a poor traveler showed up at their doorstep asking for shelter, and they cussed him away, shouting, "The devil shall give you shelter." But then thick clouds came towards them, from the mountains called the Devil's Horns. They do look like the name suggests, and it started to snow heavily. The farmers tried to make their way down to the valley, but they never made it, and their wealth and houses got crushed below the ethanol ice.
Silent scan.
In the Netherlands, we have this folklore called the Buckriders. These Buckriders were ghosts, or demonic creatures riding the sky on the back of a buck. It was said that once a year they gathered at the Mukkerhead, heather fields in the south of the Netherlands, to meet their master, the demon. It dates back to the 18th century, when groups of thieves and bandits actually used the folklore to get people scared like crazy. They plundered and rated under the name of the Bookriders. My family is from the south of the Netherlands, and my uncle used to tell me these impressive and scary stories about them, pretty much at the very place where the stories came from.
Silent scan.
The Cursed Monastery of Creek. This one is interesting because it's half historical fact. In the middle of the Norfolk Broads there's a ruined monastery. It was originally built by a relative of William the Conqueror, in order to atone for the people he'd killed in the bloody Norman conquest of England. However, some years later the monastery was destroyed during a heavy storm. It had been ravaged by fire after purportedly being struck by lightning. None of the monks survived, having had the misfortune to be fast asleep when the blaze took hold. Normally, it would be horribly traumatizing for the local community to lose their connection to God like that. However, in the wake of the fire, strange rumors were chronicled among the locals of the nearby village, that far from being men of God the monks had been practicing heretical, satanic rituals. Many of locals even came to believe the monastery had been cursed by God. Much later, under the patronage of a king, and against the protests of the locals, the monastery was rebuilt and the ground reconsecrated. But after the rebuilding was complete, the Black Death came to the area and claimed the lives of the monks living there along with many of the locals, so it was abandoned, to lapse into ruin once again. Even now visitors who make their way along the winding tracks to the monastery report a chilling sense of foreboding when standing among the shadowed ruins.
Silent scan.
La Llorona. If you're Mexican you know her story. If you're not, let me tell you then. La Llorona was from Mexico, who gave birth to twins. But the father left them, so that meant she had to take care of them herself. But she couldn't handle their crying, so she drowned them in a river somewhere. But she didn't mean to kill them. But it was too late, they were dead. Then later on she killed herself. And people were saying that you could hear her in the streets saying, "Miss Hi-Hos," and crying loudly. Most parents use it as a lesson to listen to them, or she will kill you.
Silent scan.